What's going on over here? What's going on? What's going on over here? What's going on? Oh, good morning, good evening, whenever you're watching this. We are up to Daf Samech Daled Amud Beis, top line. We're talking about a Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. He did the Hagvola correctly, one for Hashem, one for Azazel, and then one of the Sivim, one of the he-goats dies. So he only needs a replacement of one he-goat. The problem is that he can't just take one he-goat and replace it, because the Torah says that to designate one of the Seirim, you have to do a Hagvola, you have to do a lottery. So for that, he has to take two to replace just one. And on the two, he does a Hagvola, he does a lottery on the two, and he replaces the one that died. So now he actually has one spare. The question is, which one does he leave spare? That was the Machlekes we learned yesterday, Machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Rav holds that you stick to the very first one. That means you took a pair, one died, you keep the first one that never died with the replacement which you have, and the one of the lottery which was not necessary, that one you let it graze. Rabbi Yochanan says you use only the replacement ones. You do not keep any of the first. The reason is because Rabbi Yochanan holds yesh dichui bebalei chayim. An animal that is alive, even while it's alive, if there was a short time when you could not use it, so then the halacha is that it is dochui. And let's examine this case carefully. What happened was, he did the Hagvola correctly, then one of them died. When one dies, the other one becomes unusable. So it is true that you did another lottery and you found a replacement, but until you found the replacement, there was a short amount of time when the first one was unusable. And there's no such thing as something being unusable and then replaced. If you remember, the Rabbi holds that there is such a thing that you can reinstate it, and his raya is from Bali Mum Oiver, where we see that if something has a mum and the mum goes away, you can always put it back in place. So that was the Machlekes Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara for the next almost and a half tries to prove either like Rav or like Rabbi Yochanan. So we're up to Daf Samech Daled Amud Beis, top line. Omar Rava. Take him as listen kevosid Rav, ubraise kevosid Rabbi Yochanan. The Mishnah is meduyek like Rav, and the Braise is meduyek like Rabbi Yochanan. Mas listen kevosid Rav diktoni. Im shel shem meis ze shol alav gel Hashem is kaim tachto. The Mishnah says that if one of the Hashem dies, you make a lottery and you find a replacement for it, it's mashma only for that. But the other one, the idoch kedekoi koi, the Mishnah does not say make the replacement for both. The Mishnah says only replace the one that died. It's a right that we only replace the one that dies, and the one that never died we continue to use, which is Shittas Rav. Actually, according to Rabbi Yochanan, not only do we replace the one that died, we have to replace the one that lived, because for a short time it was possible. The Braise is meduyek like Rabbi Yochanan. Diktani sheni. The second one. I don't know which second one I use. The Braise says the one that its partner, its friend died, you do not use. Says the Gemara, my mashma. Where do we see from the word yomad chai that the one which his friend died can't be used? Answers the Gemara, yomad chai v'lo shekva omad. Meaning like this. The one that never died has twice, is it designated for Hashem. Once at the first lottery, and then when its friend dies, then you find a replacement, and then once again, you have to designate it. So what happens is, twice you have to designate it to be used as a korban. And the Torah says, Yomad Chai, once. Something which is designated, it should set aside alive once. It doesn't say it twice. Tanan, V'oidom Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda argues in our Mishnah. And he uses the word v'oid, which from a dialect he means he's arguing about two things. One thing the Gemara is not so busy with, and that is the concept of chatos hatzibur, whether it's meis or yira. We know there are 5 chatos, which if they belong to a yochid, and they will die. The 5 chatos, easy way to remember is v'timno vlad chatos moas chatos shvis baaleo chatos shenevdo chatos avos shnoso. The 5 chatos mentioned many times, where if it belongs to an individual, it dies. And the shaila is what happens if it belongs to a tzibur. That is a machloikas in our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, let's read the words. If the blood spills, kill the mishaleach. If the mishaleach dies, spill the blood, because you can't use one without the other. That says that once one is not usable, you can't use the other, because it's no good for a short time, and therefore it can't be reinstated. That's very good. According to Rav, that says that if something is not usable now, you can use it again in a shorter time. And why should it die? Wait until you find the replacement, and then you can use it again. Rav says that this is be'emes what Rav Yehuda and the Chachamim are arguing about. According to the Chachamim, they say that we hold Balechaim Einon Nidchin, and Rav Yehuda comes along and says Balechaim Nidchin. Ki Kamina Liv D'Rabbanan. Simon says that's very good. That is indeed the machlikas of the Chachamim. That means, in fact, the one is not saying that's the only machlikas. The Chachamim are arguing about 2 separate points. One is, do we say chatas hatzibur meisa? I just talk about this for 1 minute. Why? What's the machlikas chatas hatzibur meisa? We discussed this a few times before, but it's always good to chazar. The Torah says by chatas hayochid it shall die, and the Torah says 5 of them. It's actually halach l'mishmei Sinai. By chatos hatzibur, not all 5 apply. The simple example is vlad chatos. Vlad chatos is the child of a chatos, which by chatos hayochid dies. By chatos hatzibur, there will never be a vlad chatos, because a chatos hatzibur only comes male, which means it can't have a child. So the question is, by chatos hatzibur, since some of them can't apply, do we say that none of them can apply? That is the shaila by chatos hatzibur, and that is one of the arguments between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Rav says, besides for that, they also argue about this very question: do we say Balechaim Nidchim or not? So the Gemara says, what are they arguing about? Why does Rabbi Yehuda talk about that one should, if one dies, spill the blood? If the blood spills, to make the other one die. What's the machlekas? Indeed, our Mishnah is bedorik like Rav, and our Mishnah holds like Rav. That's the machlekas of Yehuda. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, he's got a brayso to support him. The Mishnah says that the reason why this one doesn't die is because it's a chatas hatzibur. But would it belong to an individual or die? Top of Samach Amud Aleph. Hakol moedim shniskape b'shenu avoda meisa. Rabbi is talking about like this. We know that there are 5 chatos that die. One of them is if it got lost. So if you've got lost, you found the spare, then you back of the spare, then you found the original one that got lost, you make the animal die by locking it up in the room. What happens if originally the owner never got 1 chatos, he took 2 chatos, never a person by mistake on Shabbos at the Torah will have a lit a candle. We're forgetting it's a Shabbos. So he goes to the Rav, asks the Rav, what should I do? The Rav says to him, bring a chatos. So what does he do? He goes to him when he wants to separate a chatos. He gets nervous. Who knows if I only separate 1 chatos, what's going to happen? So he separates 2 chatos, but he only needs 1. This is similar, but not exactly the same to losing a chatos. In the case where you lose a chatos and you find it eventually, you've also got 2 chatos. Here as well, you found a chatos, but here you've got 2 from the very beginning. Says of Abba, if you've got 2 from the very beginning, we do not say that it's a mesa, but rather we just say that it should be yira. It's only in a case where it was completely lost and you never had a replacement. In our Mishnah, why should the chatos die? Over here, you've got 2 chatos. Again, what's the story? You separated 2, 1 died. So you separated another 2, 1 as a replacement, and 1 because you have to have 2, because the Torah says whenever you designate 1, you have to have 2. So the Maisa, you've got 2 chatos, but there's no reason any of them should die. You've got 2 chatos originally, none of them got lost. Says the Gemara again. Let's think more inside. If the should graze, doesn't die. And says the Gemara, that means, if you remember, Rav says that we always go for the first, not for the second. The first one, because of Rabbi Shitta, you always go for the first. So in this particular case, you had 2 chatos, 1 died. Then you separated another 2 to replace the one that died. But when you separated 2, we knew already straight away that you're never going to use the first one. You're never going to use the second one. Something mistake. You're not going to use the second one because Rav holds like a view that you always go for the first. So the minute that you separated it, it wasn't that you separated two and one's a spare. You separated two with one with no intention to ever use it. And in such a case, everybody agrees that that is a chatos which dies. He shall die. Rabbi Yehuda Yomos, according to Rabbi Yehuda, said the second one should graze, according to Rabbi Yehuda shall die. So you use the second of the second. That's how Rabbi Yehuda always said it. That the second in the second shall graze. And then Rabbi Yehuda Yomos, and according to Rabbi Yehuda shall die. The Gemara in the Havmin understood that when Rabbi Yehuda says Yomos, he's referring to the very same one that the Tanakama holds Yireh. So according to Rav, which one is Yireh? Let's work it out. You've got two which you separated, one that died, so you use the first. The second one which died, you can't use instead, and then you find the replacement. So the third one, you actually use, you let it graze. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda says that it should die. The problem is, Rabbi Yehuda is the one who holds that Balechaim Nidchen. Since Balechaim Nidchen, you can't use the first because it's Nidchen, and you can't use the third because it holds the Yomos. Says, well, did you think Rabbi Yehuda when he says Yomos is going on to that one that Tanakama says he shall graze? He's going on the second of the first. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda is actually arguing on the Tanakama in two ways. Let's try and get that as clear as possible. We'll go again with A, B, C, D. You've got A and B, that was the first two chatois you separated. A la Hashem, B la Azazah. Fine. The B died. Now, really, all you need is one more for the one that died la Azazah. But you can't choose one because the Torah says you have to use la Agrona. So you take C and D. C was separated la Hashem, D la Azazah. So D takes over from B. Now, the question is, which one should you use, A and C? This, according to Rav, is a double machleikus between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Meaning like this. According to the Chachamim, they hold that Balechaim Einam Nidchen. Balechaim Einam Nidchen, we use A. And C shall graze. So C shall die, because C is a Balechaim, which is a Chatos, Shenev, meaning it's a Chatos where the other one was lost, and C shall die. That's according to Rav. Again, your A, B, C, D, B already died, it's got nothing to shine about it. D takes over from B. According to Rav, according to the Chachamim, we use A, and C dies. Comes along Rabbi Yehuda and says, I've got two issues. First of all, C doesn't need to die, because it's the Chatas at Sibur. And the Chatas at Sibur, Rabbi Yehuda holds, is got not the same thing as the Chatas Yochid. And second of all, you're all wrong anyway. We don't use A, we use C. So forget, A shall graze and C shall die. So Rabbi Yehuda argues on two separate points. Says the Gemara, they could have some asked the other way around, Rabbi Yehuda, Nishbech Adam, Yomus Meshalech, Mr. Shalech, Ishtavoch Adam. Bishtem and Rav, Veshiplik, Bechatas Sibur, Seflik, Balechai. According to Rav, the word Va'oid, which seems to be saying that they argue about two separate points, works very well. They're arguing one is Chatas Sibur Meso, Chatas Sibur Yireh. Does a Chatas Sibur die or does a Chatas Sibur graze? That's one argument. And the second argument is, do we say Balechaim Nidchen? El Rabbi Yechanan Mai Va'oid, because Rabbi Yechanan, they're only arguing about Chatas Sibur, they're arguing about two things. Kasha, the Gemara says it's a Kasha, and Rashi says, indeed, our Mishnah does not support Rabbi Yechanan, it's advice like Rabbi Yechanan. Okay. So the Mishnah says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if either one goes wrong, that means either the Mishtaleach dies, or the blood gets spilt, you have to get another two to replace. Says the Gemara, the blood spilled, so you have to let the one which got sent die. That katilos have a mitzvah. So you haven't done the mitzvah. The mitzvah was to sprinkle the blood, and instead of sprinkling the blood, you spilled the blood. So because of that, we need to get a new soil. Because we need to get a new one, we need to get another two. If the one of which was meant to be sent to Azazel dies, why do we have to start again? Who cares? Let's just say as follows. Let's just say that the one that the blood that you've got, carry on sprinkling it. Or the Mishtaleach, the one which was meant to send to Azazel died. Who cares that it died? The halacha is all you're supposed to do is make it die. What difference does it make if it died over here or if it died when it fell off the cliff? Says the Gemara. That means we learn that it has to stay alive until all the blood has been sprinkled. And since the blood has not yet been sprinkled, therefore it's not kept the mitzvah. And therefore that's why you have to get a replacement. Let's explain this once more. If we've got two seivim, one la Hashem, one la Azosa. If the blood spills of the one la Hashem, obviously you have to find a replacement because you haven't yet done the zrika. The question is, one la Azozel dies, why do you have to find a replacement? Let's just say we went to make it die. So it died. Good, it died. The answer is, it's supposed to die. But it's only supposed to die after you sprinkle the blood. And here it's died before you sprinkle the blood. So therefore you have to find a replacement. They should stay alive until you finish sprinkling the blood. Now the Gemara says a new topic. It's nan hosa. The halacha is every Yid has a mitzvah and machzah shekel. Not everybody could get to Yerushalayim. So many times they would collect together. We had this in Shkolim. If you remember, in big towns, they would collect and send very expensive pieces of diamonds or the gold. And they would send, that's why the machzah shekel from the countries far away would come in the more valuable items. And then what would happen is they would send a messenger with the machzah shekel for the whole community. So that's the whole Manchester would get together, collect the machzah shekel, and send a messenger to send it to Yerushalayim. Now, what happens if he loses it or it gets stolen on the way? So we learned this already in Shkolim, that it depends exactly when he lost it. If he lost it after the Tumas HaLishka was done, that means the Kohen has already gone into that special room and taken away 3 big buckets of machzah shekel, even though his haven't arrived. But because he's on the way, and when the Kohen does the Tumas HaLishka, he has kavanah, that he's trying to do it for all the machzah shekel that's on the way as well. So the machzah shekel, which is on the way, has already kept the mitzvah. So even if afterwards gets lost or stolen, it doesn't bother us. That means we've still kept the mitzvah. Masha'inkin, if the Kohen has not yet done the Tumas HaLishka, then the halacha is that we have to send a whole load of new machzah shekel. So it depends what exactly gets lost or stolen. Do we need to replace it or not? So if the whole manager send machzah shekel, and we send a messenger to Yerushalayim, and then on the way it gets lost or stolen, we have to verify exactly when it got lost or stolen, and it could very well be that we all have to give a machzah shekel again. Let's say we all gave it again because it got lost, and now we have to give it again. And now we find all the ones that got lost, and now we have 2 sets of machzah shekel. We have a machlokes tanoim chachamim of Yehuda as to whether we can now say, since we sent machzah shekel twice, once and then it got lost, and then we sent a second time, and then we found the ones that got lost. So therefore, we're potter for machzah shekel for the next year because we gave this year and next year. Says the Gemara. People of a city they send the shekel of a nigdav that got stolen or lost. If it's already been separated, that's the administrators in the base of Mikdash. The messengers make a shvut, the city people, they have to give replacements. Now, if they found them, or the Ganovim decided to shvu and send them back, they're both shkolim, and they cannot be used for next year. They can be used for next year. Something which can be used this year, and you gave it twice, it can be as a payment for the next year. And this Lamaisa is the main Nakuda the Gemara wants to stir upon, the Gemara wants to discuss. So let's get this point very clear. And that is that Rabbi Yehuda holds that if I have a debt to the Beis HaMikdash this year, and I gave it twice, that means, for example, in our case of the machzah shekel, I sent the money got lost, and then I sent it again, and then the money got found. According to Rabbi Yehuda, I pay for both years in one go. But like fees, if you pay a lot of fees this year, you can say to the school, look, I paid this year, so be moichel for next year. I paid double this year, I'll be moichel for next year. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can do such a thing. According to the Chachamim, they say, no, every year has its new debt. Says the Gemara, what happened was we separated all the animals for Yom Kippur, we gathered them in the Chotz of Beis HaMikdash, we gathered them all together, and we've got all the animals lined up to do the Avodah on Yom Kippur, and they all ran away. So what did we do? We then went and separated a whole new set. According to Rabbi Yehuda, then the first set comes back. Then they all come back and Beis HaMikdash. We catch them, whatever it is. According to Rabbi Yehuda, they all have to die. Let them graze until they get a balmo. We should sell them. So this is the machlekes we discussed already in our Mishnah. Do we say chatas atzibur dies or not? Everybody agrees, though, that you cannot use this set for next year. Let's get it clear. We gathered a whole set of animals for the Beis Hamikdash for Yom Kippur. They all got lost. And now we gathered a new set. And then the original set comes back. Everybody agrees we cannot use the original set for next year. The question is, why not? Why is this different from Machzis HaSheker, where we can use the set the next year? Omalei. So he said to him, Karbonis tzibuk omos, top of Samachem, based top line. Karbonis tzibuk omos. Shani karbonis tzibuk dav tovia b'yoshe, dav tovia b'yoshe. Omar calls this ulas chodesh b'chodshoy. Omar ter chadesh b'hoveli karbon mitumo chadosh. The halacha is that every year requires, every Yom Tov, every day, that you should bring the karbonos from the new Trumas Halishka. So in this case, we separated all the animals from Yom Kippur, and then all the animals got lost. And now you've got a new set of animals. You can't say, let me use the animals again for next year, because the animals were bought with which money? Let's imagine, Mashiach comes this year. So this is Tafshin Pei Aleph. The time of Yom Kippur would be Tafshin Pei Beis. So what happens is on Tafshin Pei Beis, we buy all the karbonos for Yom Kippur with the money of Tafshin Pei Beis. Then all the animals get lost, and then we get a second set, and then we find the original set. So we want in Tafshin Pei Gimel to use the animals which we bought in Tafshin Pei Beis. The problem is the money that we bought in the animals we bought in Tafshin Pei Beis was paid with money which was collected in Tafshin Pei Beis. And the halacha is, the Torah says, we also learn this in Shkonim. So there's Ulas Chodesh b'chodshoy, and we dash the word chodshoy is spare, and we dash instead of being a month, but we dash it as a word b'chodshoy as renewal. That you have to renew the new karbonos from the new Trumas Halishka. So what's the Gemara? What's your habit that you should be able to use last year's animals for the next year? You can't. You have to buy every year's karbonos from its own new Trumas Halishka. It says that works for the he-goat, because the he-goat was actually bought from the Trumas Halishka. But what about the cow? The cow of Yom Kippur, the halacha is that it is a korban yochid. The Kohen Gadol paid for it. So there's no such thing as collected from the Trumas Halishka. So for him, there's no reason to say that it should die. Let's just pay it for the new year. And this is what gzeo power to sow. It's a gzeo for the cow, also the he-goat. I mean, it's just because the he-goat can't buy it next year. You can't use last year's because it's from the wrong coffers, it's from the wrong money. So too the cow. Because of gzeo should die, let it just graze. It's only lechatchila. But if you bring this year's karbonos from last year's money, it's okay. So since b'diavad it's okay, there's certainly no reason to say that the cow should die. Gzei to the soy, if the soy itself is only lechatchila. The first day of Nisan, mitzvah loving min achadosh. Lechatchila, one is supposed to, there's a mitzvah to bring it from the new money. Bring it from the old yotza. Shechis a mitzvah, you've lost a mitzvah. The lottery, again, you had all the animals, you designated them through a hagrola, and then they got lost, and then you found a new set. You can't use last year's set for the next year because the hagrola is not kivea. So just bring them and do a new lottery. And it says, people will start saying, if you bring karbonos from a previous year, people will say, when did you designate it the year before? Is it right that you can designate it, the Kohen Gadol can stand 1 year in Yom Kippur, designate karbonos for the next 10 years, and not bother doing a hagrola every year. And we know that doesn't work. So therefore, because of that, we don't want to bring the next year's animals from the previous year, because people will think that you could designate a couple of years on the run. Says the Gemara. What are you going to say about the cow? The cow doesn't need a hagrola. So more answer the power to sow the gzeh of the cow for the he-goat. Because of gzeh which make the cow die. If we leave the animals for the next year, there's a chance the Kohen Gadol will die during the year. And we'll continue to bring the animals, will be over on the chatas shemeisu ba'aleo. And the chatas shemeisu ba'aleo is no good. Says the Gemara, that's okay. That belongs to the Kohen Gadol. So but the he-goat belongs to Kalisol. Kalisol can never possibly die. So there's never going to be a problem. Answer more Gzeo soy ought to pass. Gzeo of the he goes against the cow because we might do the cow. So the question is, why can't you use 1 year's chatos for the next year? The Gemara gives again and again suggestions. We've had so far 4 suggestions, very briefly. It's the wrong year's money, which the Gemara says only works for the he goat, not for the cow, because the cow was bought by the Kohen. Then the Gemara says, because in a girl kiveh, says the Gemara, for that, no reason to die. So the Gemara says, Gzeo Shemo Chatos Shebeis Ba'aleh, maybe the owners have died. And the Gemara says that doesn't work by the soy, because the soy belongs to Klal Yisrael, Klal Yisrael can't die. So the Gemara gives a 4th suggestion, because maybe the Chatos is past a year old. The Chatos has to be less than a year old. And if you leave it for the next year, then of course, then the Gzeo, there might be more than a year. Hey, the Gemara. Gzeo This is the classical example of a chatos shavosh nasa. Why? Let's work it out. You separated the animals for Yom Kippur. The animals got lost, and you found the replacements. Then you find the original animals. You want to use them next year. Well, there's no way that the animals are going to be kosher the next year, because it's a chatos which is too old. Holei kasha, kirebi, the Tanya, shana tmima. Whenever the Torah says a year for many different halachas, for example, Korban Pesach has to be a year old, less than a year. A chatos has to be less than a year. A person who sells a walled city, a house in a walled city, he's only given 1 year to redeem it. After the year, he never gets it back. So what happens is, in all of these cases, whenever we talk about a year, there are 2 ways to define a year. One way is to say it's 365 days. 365 days is a year. Another way is to say a calendar year. A calendar year is 354 days. So that's Machlekes Rabbi and Chacham. Now, if you hold like Rebbe, that a year is 365 days, it could actually be possible to have a chatos which is kosher for 2 continuous years. Why? You take a chatos which is 8 days old, which is good enough, as long as it's more than 7 days, it's okay. And you bring it on Yom Kippur as the chatos which you need for that year. Then it gets lost, and you find it again. You wait 354 days, so now it's 362 days old, this soy. But it's still within the year, because according to Rebbe, to be a year old, that's within 365 days. The Tanya Shana Tmimo, Moina Shlushbus, Shisha Bechabisha Yom Kippur Mosachamo Diva Rebbe. Rebbe holds that a year is 365 days. It's actually a year, calendar year. This is the interesting halacha. That if I sell a property within a walled city, I've only got 1 year to redeem it. According to Rebbe, I have 365 days. According to the Chachamim, I only have 12 months. 12 months is 354 days. Let's say I sold it in Adon, and it came towards the end of Adon, and I still can't buy it back. I don't have enough money. And suddenly, based and say, you know what, this year, in those days, they only established the second Adon within Adon. So they suddenly said, you know what, let's make an extra Adon this year. So now I'm given an extra month to be able to buy back my house. So Gemara says, so therefore it's possible to have it within less than a year that you should have 2 Yom Kippurs. What are you going to say about the cow? So Gemara says, Gzeo power to soy. Gzeo for the cow because of the higut. Gzeo yamos. Because Gzeo should die. The word chatas shavosh nasa levia oz that goes to grazing and not to death, like we said before. We pretend that's standing in the Beis HaKvoros. And just like a Kohen can't go in the Beis HaKvoros, this chatos can never be used again. So we're now back to square one. The question is, why is it that if we separate a chatos in Yom Kippur, why is it that we cannot use it again the next year? Don't tell me because it's the wrong money, because we bought it for previous year money, because that only works for the soy, it doesn't work for the pot. Don't tell me because the hagvola doesn't work, because that's also not a problem. Just make a new hagvola. Don't tell me because the owners have died, because that only works by the pot, by the soil. It's impossible for the owners to have died because it belongs to Klal Yisrael. Don't tell me because it's past a year, because if it's the whole point because it's past a year, you don't make it die, you just make it graze. So Moshe Hashem, tomorrow we'll work out the final answer of the Gemara. I just want to point out that the past 2 daf have been extremely, extremely difficult. And if you've found it challenging, it is no reflection whatsoever on the next few dafim, which are much, much easier. And therefore, it should make you feel like a yush. These were very, very hard dafim. Mr. Hashem will get much easier and we'll be able to get into that. Tzlacha, which have any questions, you're welcome to text or phone me.